Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupini Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te nama Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. We are continuing our discussion on this foundational text of Advaita philosophy, that is Vivekachudamani. Last time we discussed the 144th verse, which again introduces the subject of concealment and false projection, which are already in Avarana and Vikshepa. How the reality is concealed, and when the reality is concealed, how a false projection is made. These are two important subjects we already discussed earlier. In fact, the 143rd verse creates the background. Maha moha graha krasana galidantma mano dhiyo nanavasthasu abhinayam sadgunataya apari samsare vishapure jaranidhu nimajya unmijyayam brahmadi kumadi kurchidagati. It's a very slightly long verse. What it means is this. This world, this samsara, is compared to an ocean filled with poisonous, toxic water. And because of our attraction, our attachment to worldly desires, we are not able to come out of these toxic waters. We are trying to get across the river, but we are not able to do that. So, nibajya unmajya, we sometimes we go down, we come up again. And this continues. This is the phenomenon known as samsara in Buddhism and in most of the religious traditions of Indian origin. This world and worldly life is considered to be a limitation, is kind of bondage, but that we should try to come out of. And becomes a bondage when we realize that it has got some inherent limitations, which were dukha. The word dukha in Buddhism doesn't really mean what the word could mean in a dictionary. The dictionary meaning is grief or sorrow. But the actual implication that Buddha had in mind when he used the word in Pali and Prakrit languages, the kind of inherent, inescapable incompleteness, impermanence that is associated with everything in this empirical world. Everything is coming and going, nothing is permanent. Whole life is a constant succession of pain and pleasure, dukha and sukha and so on. There is no consistency for anything, and this itself is inherently incomplete or imperfect. That feeling of imperfection or incompleteness is the actual implication of the word dukha in Vedanta and also in Buddhism. So frequently people think that dukha is grieving or crying and weeping and complaining. Everything in this world is bad. It's not that. That's not the meaning. So always you should keep in mind, a word can have one meaning in dictionary, in language, in linguistics and philology, and you have a totally different meaning in philosophy. Just like many of the words that we use in medicine, engineering or IT are very different. You don't find those meanings attached to those words in the 19th century editions of Oxford Dictionary. I'm talking about English language. The language has changed because as you evolve further and as new sciences and new branches of learning emerge, new meanings emerge as a result. So dukha in Buddhism, in Hinduism, Vedanta, it means the essential, the inescapable, the inherent incompleteness or imperfection. And that is the nature of life in this world. Now, who realizes this to be something like a bondage only those who have some degree of spiritual evolution. A person who lives in this world, who eats his food, have a wonderful home, a job and money, and he thinks nothing more than that, he thinks this is all about life. Such a person doesn't feel this world is essentially imperfect. It's a perfect world for person. At the very lowest ladder. But Sri Ramakrishna, the gospel uses like Mooladhara Drishtina. It's a word used in Yoga Vasishtha, but Sri Ramakrishna used those whose focus is only at the lower levels of human existence. That's all. But those who have evolved in spiritual life, they find, well, everything is wonderful, money, status, job, home, everything, but that's not enough. So when you feel that's not enough, it means you are looking for something higher, and also you are looking what you already have got as essentially imperfect. That's why you're looking for something higher. When you go for a new job, it means you are looking for a better job, and you consider the current job as something to be transcended, something to be superseded, something inferior. That's why we are looking for a new one. So anyone who has this feeling that, maha moha graha grasana galidatma gamano. So like a huge crocodile has caught you by the throat. And that crocodile is the desire for material enjoyments, physical enjoyments, and other kinds of enjoyment. And that's compared to a huge crocodile which has caught you by the throat, not willing to give you up. And then dhiyaka, and that person anavastasu abhinayam sadgunataya. So what happens is, because his mind is deluded, so what happens, he thinks all these states that he's experiencing and all the objects of desire, he thinks as his objects of desire. And such a person is called a lost intelligence, dhiyo nanavasthas abhinayam sadgunataya. And so he is completely, because he called kumatihi kutsidagatihi. Kumati means somebody who is intelligent, who is intellect, whose thinking, his focus is inferior, is deluded, it is degraded. A person who cannot think beyond the physical enjoyment, such a person in this context means kumati. Mati means intelligence, lower intelligence, kutsidagati, and he is actually destined to reach over the precipice, fall over the precipice. This is what is being here. And this again continues. And then we already discussed this elaborately until the next verse. 145th verse, the new verse we could discuss right now. It's a very, very, very graphic description of how the reality is concealed from us. What do we mean by this concealment of the reality? The Vedanta tells us that though we have a physical existence, an emotional existence, a mental and intellectual existence, our true identity is beyond all this body, mind, intellect. And our true identity is Atman, the effulgent, the all-pervading reality. But we are not aware of that, because something is concealing the reality. And that concealment is called avarana. And what is that concealing veil? It is our own desire. Actually, when people are extremely attached to physical desires, they cannot think of anything higher. Those who are extremely attached to physical desires, they cannot even read a good book. They cannot enjoy a good music or a painting or art, leave alone spirituality, because they live at the physical level. Again, we can have a higher existence, intellectual, emotional level. At that time, we can leave behind the physical. we'll be able to enjoy a higher identity of our own personality. But all these are okay. It's far better to live at the intellectual level than always living at the physical level. And it's far better to live at the spiritual level than living at the intellectual level. We find many of the great geniuses go mad, totally unsettled in mind. Many geniuses. So William James, the great American psychologist, coming back to America, he thinks that there is only very, very thin line of demarcation between a genius and a man who is totally insane. So that means even a genius is very close to some kind of insanity unless he is guided by some higher spiritual ideals. So the ancient verse is there. Yapuman adimedhavi chadurnam ekamasnade atpayu anavadyova daridra patitopiva. People who are extremely intelligent in pushing their powers to the extreme level. Great artists, great musicians who perform for hours. Writers who can contribute great creative art, literature, history and music and so on. So they have pushed their intelligence, their creative power, creativity to a higher level. Because after their work, they have to go for alcohol or drugs. They want to get out of their own mind, their own mental pressure. Because when they push their creativity to a higher level, Adi Metha means higher intellectual, creative powers. He will have one of these four problems. So Alpayu Anavadyova Daridra Paditopiva. This is an ancient verse. Either he'll be short-lived, or he'll be poor, or he'll have a fall in his life, or go insane. All this. He'll be short-lived, he'll be insane, he'll have a fall, or he'll be poor. Some kind of very serious problems. Because these extreme intellectual creative powers also have a price, a cost to pay. That is, we are exhausting, we are creating tremendous fatigue with the intellect. That's why intellect also is not the highest level. So intellect also should be linked to some higher spiritual ideal, even to preserve intellectual health. So that's why, and then when this happens, what happens is, when we link ourselves to this higher level, this concealment is slowly removed. The avarana disappears. Here is given a very graphic description. Kabalida dinanadhe durdine sandrimekaihi vyatayedi himavat chanchavayu ugro yathaitan avirada tamasa atmani avrde buddhabuddhim Kshapayedi Bahudukkaihi Tivra Vikshepa Shakti. So there is a very, very wonderful example, which is description of Avarana and Vikshepa both. You can find here. So let us say, for example, suppose there is a strong wind that's blowing, and there is a huge, thick cloud of clouds that conceal the sun, won't allow you to have any sunlight. So what happens is, such a day is a bad day for you, rainy, full of rains. So Kabalida Dinadanthe Durdine Santrimekaihi. Very thick clouds, and the cloud is concealing the sun. And there is a lot of fog, snow, and rains, and strong storms and winds, and tornado. And this will create traveling, it can turn traveling into a disaster. Lot of problems and difficulties while traveling, moving ahead. When there is no sunlight, because the sunlight is hidden by a thick cloud, and there is heavy rain, and then there is extreme cold and strong wind and tornado. Himasansa vayuhu ugro yathaitan. So, I mean, this extremely cold, strong wind, and also a lot of snow and rains. Then avirata tamasa atmani avrute. What happens is, just like the sunlight is hidden by the clouds, and when the sunlight is hidden, what happens is, you don't know how to travel. So all kinds of problems will occur. It will create lots of problems. Because there is extreme darkness, avirata tamasa atmani avrute mudha buddhi. So our desires, our obsession with worldly enjoyments, or this drive for material progress, enjoyments, that completely make life miserable. So, in the extreme greed is one good example. Extreme greed. We feel greed. Actually, every person, if you look at this very simple, interesting example, every intelligent person knows that if you are even the richest man in the world, you may not be the happiest person. Beyond the limit, money itself is a computed digit figure. It doesn't have any value. If you are a billionaire with the stock exchange, maybe multi-billionaire, let's see, still people struggle to get a few more hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. This money actually is only an imagination, really. It's a computed digit figure. It can disappear one day. But still we are attached, obsessed with this figure. So I'll give you the example of Sri Ramakrishna's parable is the story of a greedy man. A man who was very humble, living a very pure life, very satisfied, contented life, his family, wife, children, and so on. By profession he was a barber, and he was a royal barber, so he was getting a lot of money, the king's favorite barber. So one day he was walking in the forest, suddenly heard a noise, a voice coming from behind a tree, and the tree asked him, "Do you want these 7 jars of gold?" This man was already living a happy life, but not very poor at all, but not fabulously rich, but he was certainly not poor, well satisfied with life. He had enough money for children, family, and so on. But when he heard about this, the voice asking him, "Do you want 7 jars of gold?" He was very happy. He said yes. And he went home, he found 7 jars of gold, full of gold. Only the 7th jar was not 100% full, just a few more coins and it can fill it. So he thought, well, he has plenty of money because he was a royal barber, he was getting a lot of salary, huge salary. So he thought he will convert whatever money he has got into gold coins and fill the 7th jar. So he looked at the joy of a man who cannot make use of it, seeing the 7th jar filled with gold. Actually, he cannot even make use of the first jar, one of the 7. Because it was only for his enjoyment of seeing the 7 jars filled with gold coins. He was not allowed to make use of any of them, that the voice told him. But still, what happened, his whole attention was focused on somehow obtaining a few more gold coins and fill the 7th jar, so that he had this tremendous joy of seeing the 7th jar also filled with gold coins. And gradually, what happens? He started starving his own children, his own wife. Within a few months, his wife started going about in rags. Children became starved and they fell sick. And the king noticed this man also had become very, very famished, skeleton. The king asked him, what's the matter with you? He didn't say anything. The king said, oh, so you got the 7 jars of gold. The king was a wiser person. He had himself experienced. And he had gone there. When he was asked this question, do you want these 7 jars of gold? The king, being a very intelligent man, he said, well, all right, if I get 7 jars of gold, I can distribute, I can make use of this money to improve the living standard of the people in the country. No, you can't make use of it. Then I don't need it. He threw it away. So when the king found his own employee, servant, becoming more and more famished looking, children starving, and he also started borrowing money, stealing money from neighboring homes, just to acquire few more gold coins so they can fill the 7th jar. This is the predicament of modern civilization. Just to see the computer digit figure, and what a joy that you derive when you get, when you see the computer figure, your stock exchange stocks have gone up, share markets have gone up, and it's not going to help you. You can't buy a home with that. If you have got $1 trillion or $100 billion, you can't make use of it anytime. Beyond a few millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion or less than that, beyond that, it's only a computer figure. No one can eat gold every day. You have to eat food only, which costs only a few thousand, hundreds of dollars. So what happens? So that's why Vyathayati. So this happens because this gentleman, this barber, he did not know the true meaning of human life. The king mentioned, whom I referred to earlier, he had studied higher philosophy, spirituality from a teacher. So that's why he is an intelligent king. He is a philosopher king. He was a very rich man, but at the same time, he was not worried about it. So, if you don't understand the fact that without some higher value, wealth itself is a trap, is a prison, is a precipice, is a tragedy. That's why Vyathayadi himavat sancha vayurugro yathaidan. So, avirata tamasa atmani avrude. So, the extreme darkness is concealing our true nature, Atman. Then what happens is, it projects something else in its place. So if you don't try to understand, if you don't try to focus on our true identity, then a false identity will be projected in its place. Then we try to interpret our life in terms of physical enjoyments. Instead of Atman, we try to define ourselves as a physical entity. Remember, Vedanta is not asking anyone to forget this world and to focus on something higher. Not at all. Vedanta is asking us that while living in this world, while doing all the work of a normal person, keep these higher ideals in mind. That's what Vedanta tells you. So once you keep this higher ideal, what happens is, we can live in this world in a more intelligent manner. So, if you're walking through the forest, if a voice asks you, do you want 7 jars of gold? If you study Vedanta, you would say, well, what's the use of the 7 jars of gold? Can I use it for improving my own living conditions? To do some good work? Because money itself has no value other than the value that you get to derive while you making use of it. Otherwise, it just I mentioned is a computer figure, a piece of paper perhaps. So this is concealment. I mean, our true nature is concealed and false identity is projected in its place. And there is a well-known verse after that, which is 147th verse. So actually, it's the answer to a question. Again, you have to remember the 7 questions in the Vivekachudamani. That is, ko nama bandha, kadamesha agada, kadam padishthasya, kadam vimokshaka, kosu anatma, paramaka atma, Tayor Vivekas Kadamedu Vichadam. See this 7 question in the 54th verse, you have to remember. Of these, the next verse is an answer to the 7th question, the 3rd question. The 3rd question is Kadam Pradishthasya. We already covered other questions. The 3rd question is Kadam Pradishthasya. How does this bondage remain active? How is sustained? That's the question. Kadam Pradishthasya. Asya Pradishtha Kadam. How, in what process is this bondage sustained? That is how does it spread? How does it remain like that? How does this bondage manifest? How do we experience in this world? Very well-known verse, so I shall read it. Bijam samsruti bhumijasyatu tamo dekhatmadhirankureha raga pallava mambu karma tuvapu skantho asava shakhikaha agrani indriya samhridischa pishayaha pushpani dukkham phalam nana karma samudbhavam bhuvidham bhoktatra jiva khaga. Very famous verse. So here we can see a very, very interesting example is even here. There is this tree, the samsara, which we discussed till now, the samsara of desire for empirical things, worldly things, being born, enjoyments and suffering, then remaining in our mind all desires, again reborn again with the same desires, again suffering and enjoyment, death, again rebirth, again this cycle continues. It's called samsara. In Buddhism and also in Hinduism, samsara is very... So the tree of samsara. This samsara is a comparative tree. So, this tree, there are many things on this tree. For example, flowers, fruits, seeds, then shoot. When you plant a seed, it becomes a shoot. Then a tender sprouts. Then you have to pour water. Then the trunk. Then the winds blows and the leaves move out. And the tendrils, these soft leaves. And again, flowers, fruits, and so on. And also some birds coming to eat these fruits. All these are mentioned in this description, very important description. So, our absence of knowledge, ignorance of our own true nature, or our ignorance of the meaning of human life, that is the seed. Bija means seed. Bijam samsriti bhumijasyatu tamaha. So what is the seed? The seed is our ignorance of our own nature. Again I want to repeat, Vedanta tells us that our true nature is Atman. But then, what's the practical use of that knowledge? The point is, when we live in this world, when we face conflicts, ups and downs, pain and pressure, we won't be shocked. We'll be able to handle, we'll be able to manage problems without being shocked and devastated. That's the advantage of Vedanta. Vedanta is not a solution to all the problems. If you have a problem with your health or anything, Vedanta solved the problem. Vedanta is not a doctor. Vedanta gives us a higher perspective of life as a whole, a higher way of looking at life and experiences from a higher perspective. So when we think of ourselves to be the physical body, the slightest physical problem becomes a disaster, a dilemma, a big problem. When we interpret ourselves to be by mind, then mental complaints, anxieties and worries become extremely unbearable. But suppose we define ourselves to be something higher than all these, then these problems become manageable. No one knows that physical body is immune to illness or old age. Absolutely, everyone knows. But still we forget it. So Vedanta only is trying to remind us this fundamental truth that we know intellectually, but we are not able to make any use of in our real life. So here the point is that the absence of true awareness of our true identity, that is ajnana, avidya, that is the seed of all problems. That is the seed of this huge tree of samsara. And then that, the shoe that comes after some time, that is, we mistake our body as the only reality, we mistake our body as the Atman. That is the natural result of ignorance. And then, this shoot becomes a tender sprout. So seed, then tender a shoot and a sprout, and then it gets water. You need water, otherwise the sprout will not grow. And it needs a manure perhaps, or different actions full of desire, greed and competition. Want more and more, this extreme desire for possessing things. And our activities in that direction constitute what? And then, what is this body? The trunk of the tree is the body. And the pranas, the vital airs are the winds. And then our senses of action and senses of perception come in contact with different objects is called tendrils. So what it means is, when our eyes and mind together see an object, then the mind creates a desire. It develops a desire for possessing that object. When we touch something with the skin, that becomes a matter of attraction. When we hear something, that also can create an attachment or aversion depending upon things. It is called, it's like tendrils. It's part of the tree. And then flowers, sense objects are flowers. What we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch, what we taste, 5 senses of perception. These are flowers. And what is the result? Fruits, suffering. So one may ask this question, why should we look upon life as suffering? There again is a problem of language. Life is not defined as something miserable in Vedanta. Again, suffering here, dukha is a translation of the Sanskrit word dukha in Buddhism also. What it means is, when we find that what we have is not enough, and that is true for everyone. We never have enough. We're always looking for something higher. And that creates desire, and desires normally are not completely fulfilled. There is no one in this world who has 100% fulfilled all his desires. So what happens is that unfulfilled desires create suffering, dukha. That's the fruit. So what's the fruit of the tree? This unquenchable, the endless thirst for enjoyments, which is always there. That is what's driving everyone forward. And again, this is the result of karma. And then there is somebody else here. Bird. Bird is coming eating these fruits. Our own experience. So what really happens is, this samsara vriksha is sometimes called the visha vriksha. Visha means toxic poison. It need not be. In fact, this samsara, this life in this world need not necessarily be unpleasant. toxic, not at all. Only when we recognize that it is by its very nature imperfect. And therefore we should, along with that, while living in this world, we should go for something higher, some higher value. Then this life itself becomes like a garden, an enjoyable garden. So this is a very famous verse. Bijam samsriti bhumijasya tamo dehatmadi anguraha raga pallavam ambu karmadu babu skandhu asava shakhigaga agrani indri samkhadischa vishayaha pushpani dukham phalam nana karma samudbhavam bhavidam bhoktatra jiva khaga. It's a very, very famous verse. It's a very descriptive outlook of human life. How? Because we forget what we know intellectually. And that's a very important point to remember. Vedanta doesn't give us any new knowledge. Vedanta actually points its finger to some obvious reality that we know intellectually. People read these books. That doesn't solve all the problems for people. But it reminds us again and again of this ultimate truth. That's what Vedanta does. Looking at the entirety. So this itself becomes a blessing. So there is an interesting story. It's found in one of Kalidasa's famous literary classic. It's called Kumara Sambhava. You know, Kalidasa roughly may be called the Shakespeare of India. But Kalidasa, you have to remember, he lived in 2nd century AD, and the writer of immortal classics. Many of his works, his plays like Malavyagnimithram, or his classic like Kumara Sambhava, so they were translated into German right at the beginning of 18th century. That was many of the greatest Indologists of Europe started translating Kalidasa's marvelous classics. In a way, he's far, far greater than Shakespeare could ever have thought of, than maybe Shakespeare or anyone else in Western literature. So this gentleman, there's a well-known verse in one of his important classics. It's a poetical classic, Kumara Sambhava. The verse is this: Apikriyartham sulabham samitkusam jalani visnani vidhikshamanide apisashaktya tapasi pravartase sharira madhyam khali dharma sadhana. Actually, the last phrase is very important, very closely linked to what we are discussing right now. What it says is this. You know, it's a very interesting scene. Uma, a pious, humble, spiritually evolved person, was doing extreme austerity meditation for years and years to get a vision of Lord Shiva. So Shiva himself came incognito to test her devotion. So he came incognito, disguised. And he found this young lady was meditating, doing all kinds of spiritual practices vigorously in a lonely forest. It's on top of a mountain actually, it's a forest on the top of a mountain in the Himalayas. That's where the story is set in the Kumara Sambhava. So she's taking bath in the morning and meditating. So Shiva, coming incognito, asked her, Api kriyartham sulabham samikusam jalani visnani vidhikshamanite api sasaktya tapasi pravartase sharira madhyam khali dharma sadhanam. You are torturing your body. And this body is an important instrument for higher purpose. So, adyamin mukhyam, the most important instrument you have in your possession is not actually money, because when health is lost, everything is lost. The old story, maxim goes like that. So when your health is gone, then the money in the bank doesn't help you. Friends won't help you. your health is totally miserable, life is gone. So Shiva makes a point, don't torture your body. Sharira madhyam khari dharma sadhanam. Dharma sadhana means an instrument with tool in your hands to do good things, great things in this world. Though he is testing this lady who was meditating, going through austerities, but still he concludes the statement with one statement, this body should not be tortured. Are you doing all these austerities by your own power? You have got pure water in the morning, taking bath in the Ganga. Then do you have all necessary ingredients for performing this homa, fire sacrifice, samit kusham? Then do you have water for your spiritual oblations and other ceremonies? Do you have flowers? All those things you have, puja, all ingredients for different puja and so on. Then he said, don't torture your body too much, because body is the most important instrument with which we can accomplish great things. So, body is not condemned here, but body worshipping is condemned. Because when we start worshipping the body falls sick. When we focus our mind exclusively on the body, our mind also falls sick. That's what really happens. So even to keep our body healthy, we have to go little beyond the body. To keep your mind healthy, you have to go beyond the mind. To get the intellect healthy, we have to go beyond the intellect. So what Lord Shiva was trying to drive home was this. Don't torture your body too much. Of course, this is used only as a way to test Uma's austerities. But the context has got different meanings and different interpretations. Vallinatha, the great Sanskrit commentator, wrote a commentary on this Sanjeevani commentary on the Kumarasambhava. So what it means is this. Here, this particular verse, Samsara Vriksha, physical life, worldly life, is compared to a tree. And the tree, its seed is ignorance of our true nature. As a result, it grows, it sprouts, the trunk, the leaves, the tendrils, and the fruits and leaves, all that come up. But the point is, the fruit should not be dukha. The fruit should be sukha. And what is sukha? Sukha means not the literal meaning again. Actual sukha is the ability to go beyond both sukha and dukkha. We will be able to enjoy life only when we stop looking for enjoyment. Because when we stop looking for enjoyment, we are not going to be disappointed at all. Because disappointment comes when there is appointment. That means some desire, some goals, some things to be accomplished. If we can stop desiring for things and then continue work, called swadharma, karma yoga and so on, what happens is there is no room, no scope for any kind of problem. This is very important. Anyone who is always looking for a continuous succession of happiness in life is not going to succeed. Because no one in this world can have a continuous, unbroken succession of happiness. Every happy experience will be accompanied by an unhappy experience. Because if you are happy today and if you are less happy tomorrow, that lesser happiness becomes unhappiness. So, and again, no one can expect to have the same pleasant, happy experience every day in succession, in unbroken succession. So the only way to go beyond problem is not to be worried about problem, to look beyond problem. To stop looking for a problem-free life, then there will be no problem. To understand that life itself cannot be an unbroken succession of happiness. So we stop looking for happiness, there is not going to be any kind of unhappiness. Unhappiness cannot exist without desire for happiness. It's a very famous verse. We will continue our discussion next class, and we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. You are most welcome. Thank you.
No one wants to step up? No? Okay. Thank you for your lecture, Swamiji. So anyways, there's sort of been variations on this theme, this question I'm going to ask. So with the seed, this root, the jnana, the avidya, the mistaking, come at it from, and I'm sure I'm probably not the only person that's went through this, that as a Westerner, say growing up in traditions where there's a certain amount of religious dogma, you know, people, they read, say, the Bible, they go to church on Sunday, and obviously there's high ideals, but there's a certain amount of, this is the dogma you're supposed to believe, and most people, you know, sort of go along with the status quo. They believe it to a certain extent, or anyways, people have different levels of faith. And I know Shraddha, or faith, like in Buddhism, and I would assume in Hinduism, is ultimately not dogmatic. It's based on personal experience, you know, that somebody who's achieved, I think, I can't remember, one of the Swamis, was it Swami Brahmananda, said, you know, true religion starts with samadhi or something like that. So anyways,
repeat, true religion?
True religion starts with samadhi.
Yeah,
something along those lines. And maybe you got that from Swami Vivekananda, I'm not sure. But so what I'm trying to get at is that on one hand, we're taught this dogma, this religious dogma, whether to accept or not. But then on the other hand, in the West, you know, and it was worldwide now, we're taught a certain amount of science. So in science, we have to have a certain amount of doubt. There's a scientific method. We're not supposed to just take things on hearsay. We're supposed to, you know, based on experimentation or, you know, mathematics, you know, inductive or deductive reasoning, that sort of thing. So with where I'm leading at is with this avidya is, on one hand, it's like I don't want to just jump from one tradition that says accept this religious dogma to another tradition that says, you know, basically it seems like, and I kind of asked last week, sorry this is long-winded, but until we have real mystical experiences, there's a certain amount of, we have to take this on faith from the scriptures or other people that are more spiritually advanced that say there really is this spirit, where empirically we know there's a body and mind. I mean, we experience it. We deal with pleasure and pain all the time. And it's, now spirit is an amorphous term, whether, you know, it's consciousness or, you know, anyways, it's something that transcends just the body and mind. So anyways, it's trying to find this balance between not being dogmatic and having a certain amount of, you know, respectful skepticism, not just to believe anything that someone tells us, but then at the same time, you know, I guess in correct me if I'm wrong, in Hinduism or in Vedanta, there's a certain amount of what's epistemology that I guess they accept scripture as valid knowledge. But then I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Buddhism, on the other hand, there's a certain amount of, you know, like the Kalama Sutta, where the people are like, well, all these people come, these different preachers and mystic or practitioners come, and we don't know who to believe. And the Buddha says, you know, follow what you know from your personal experience to be wise, something like that. So in that tradition, it seems like they're not just saying scripture is the authority, it has to be based on personal experience. So long-winded answer is that we have this avidya, but it's kind of understandable because we know we have a body and mind, but this spirit or this consciousness, unless we're a true mystic, there's a certain amount of wavering that how much we accept from the scriptures versus like, I don't want to just take it for granted without personal experience. So I think you know what I'm trying to get at.
You're right.
It's been a common theme, you know.
So you are right. So first of all, personal experience. Now, Hinduism and Vedanta, which is Vedanta is the highest fruit of Hindu evolution. It is not just a religion. It is an inquiry into our own true nature. That's the briefest possible, most direct definition of Vedanta. An inquiry into the reality which is our own true nature. That's how Vedanta is to be defined. So it is not a sociological construct, not a hierarchical construct, again not a theological construct. On the other hand, when you're asked to believe in a dogma and certain do's and don'ts, and somebody asks you in a hierarchy who claims, again, it's a claim only, not historically proved. So if you look at historical proof, then there is more proof of scientifically. Even today, nobody takes seriously creationist theories, really speaking. Nobody takes it seriously. We have people preach, but they also don't really believe in it because people will laugh at you. If God created this for 6,000 years ago, if I start 1, 2, 3 like that. That sort of, those ideas are found in some Hindu mythological books also. But those ideas are meant to take a person to a higher level, not to be literally believed in. So Hinduism, fortunately, is not just a social construct, not a theological construct. It is all about our own spiritual journey, what we are. Second point I tell you, and there is from a psychological point of view, it's very important. Very often how you define yourself affects your life and also your interactions with people around. So this is a very important thing actually, what I said just now. Historically, it is loaded with meaning and consequences, you know. How we define ourselves in terms of a faith system, a belief system, and then what way it influences our action with our fellow human beings, other people. When we define ourselves in terms of some books, some dogmas, it can make us totally unspiritual. It can make us monsters. But at the same time, many of the holy scriptures in the world, all traditions, not only Vedanta, in other religious traditions also, there are some higher truths, universal truths, ethical, moral ideas, which are universal, which have got a relevance for all times. What Vedanta essentially is, Vedanta may be called a sum total of all these together. You can become a good human being actually only when we go beyond our identity with the physical body, which again linked to a birth and race and nationality, culture, and habits, all handed over from generation, influenced by your geographical region or cultural limitations. All these are linked to sociology, culture, geography, history, race, and so on. So if we can look beyond our body, mind, and intellect and think of ourselves as part of the divine, as at least as a concept. You may not have experienced it. You may not have experienced at all. But if you believe in it, logically, it's a very convincing idea. If you believe in it, then it has got a great effect in the world, in the human life, in human interactions. That's why I said, very often how we define ourselves in a way affects our actions with our fellow human beings. So if we can think of some higher universal spiritual truths, which are somehow found in all traditions, Vedanta in a way it is the essence of all these universal truths. In that respect, Vedanta is the highest fruit of Hindu evolution. Hinduism itself has got many other sociological, theological ideas, almost like dogmas, but there was no persecution in the name of it. But the problem is, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, Shankaracharya, he considers these are all secondary. He doesn't dismiss when somebody believes in something, no, you're wrong. He cannot say that. But when he grows up, when he evolves further, then these things are secondary. When you are a child, maybe a Cadbury chocolate is the most wonderful thing in this world. But when you grow up, it is left behind. So as we evolve further, our own ideas will change. So even if we have not experienced, our own refined intellect will tell us that something that divides humanity, something which is very divisive, cannot be the work of God. God, if at all there is a God, he cannot be a very partial being who says, you do your my man, the other man is my enemy. How can a God is a God of everyone, or he is God of no one? He is not a God at all. He is a politician, Politicians have got a problem. He belongs to my party, he belongs to another party. God cannot be a politician. God can be the God of everyone. So he cannot be divisive. He cannot be partial to certain people and then cruel to another people. He couldn't be. So I think when you think along these lines, you find Vedanta just presents before us some higher truths. Now, when we are going to experience this, if you deeply think over this slowly, you start realizing the truth of this spiritual idea. That is realization. Realization doesn't mean that growing a beard, suddenly getting some... That's not Vedanta. Shankaracharya doesn't agree with that sort of thing. So the greatness of Shankara, he was a sharp scientific temperament he had. He dismissed all this external, pretentious, hierarchical dogmatism. He says truth is truth for everyone. You realize it. It could be in any tradition. And another very important thing in Vedanta is, belief in God will help you to become a Vedantin, but even if you are not a Vedantin, if you are not a believer in God, still you can be a Vedantin. That is possible only in Advaita Vedanta. It's all about realizing our true nature. I know it's not easy to find out, to be convinced, because we have this strong Abrahamic tradition of dividing. These are good people, they are bad people. They are going to hell, they are going to heaven. This is my religion. So Vedanta doesn't agree with that. It is so universal. Yeah.
So there's a lot that you said that's very wise. So to keep it, maybe to summarize some points that are relevant to myself,
Yeah.
it seems that we would start with ethics, like in yoga, the
Yeah.
yamas and niyamas. We would want to be a good human being.
Yeah.
We always stress. And then you try to keep respect for my intellect.
Yeah.
Understand it makes sense there to be something beyond the intellect, but at the same time not jumping into dogma. You talk about belief, in a higher ideal, but I guess maybe I would say is at least the possibility that there's something beyond the mind and the body.
And attempt to believe that makes you a good human being.
Right.
This is something very interesting.
I'm saying, at least keep it, even if it's just a possibility.
Yeah.
Is I consider
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely.
I can't prove it, but it's a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
And another point I want to add to this is very important, when you believe in this and you believe in this possibility of transcending, breaking through all these limitations and prejudices and devious tendencies, what happens is you feel a kind of inner serenity, which doesn't express as great liking for something or great aversion for something. It is neither a great attachment, obsessive, fanatical attachment to something, or total aversion to something else. And when you reach that stage, mind also becomes calm and quiet, and you experience a kind of inner serenity. That's a proof whether it is spiritual or not. Suppose you believe in some dogma and that makes you more cruel, more inhuman towards others, cannot be anything spiritual in it. If it is spirituality, it should make you a good human being.
So to go along with that, from your teachings over the years, is that I would say that we have our ethics, becoming a decent human being, which is universal truths. The ethics is universal.
Maybe there may be other questions,
Right, and then the possibility that there is divinity.
Yeah.
And then I would say that through sattvic living and praying and meditating, then hopefully our intellect becomes more refined, and that we have these experiences that make it real.
You mentioned something very important. We discussed the 19th verse of this text, Yama, Niyama, all these. That's very important. That's a gateway to spirituality in real practical life. Okay. Thank you for the question and discussion. Yeah.
There's a question online.
Yeah.
Question is, does the enlightened being experience happiness?
The enlightened beings. Yeah. True. That you are very, very relevant question. Does a spiritually enlightened, evolved person experience happiness? He does experience happiness. He actually experiences happiness, but that happiness is different from the experience of people who are looking for something that gives some kind of satisfaction. Because every kind of normal worldly happiness is an opposite, is an absence of its opposite. I hope we understand. In worldly level, at the worldly level, happiness or sukha is only an absence of, a temporary, for the time being, absence of dukha. Because you cannot have continuous, unbroken succession of happiness. So every happiness is a kind of temporary absence of its opposite at the worldly level. But when you become spiritually enlightened, you are not looking for happiness. Your mind transcends and goes beyond happiness and unhappiness equation. So they are always in a state of a perpetual kind of happiness, which doesn't change at all, remain the same. That is the uniqueness of a spiritually enlightened person. He doesn't look for happiness, so he's not going to be unhappy at all. And that state goes beyond happiness and unhappiness both. Okay. Yeah, santosha, correct. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay, so I think we conclude now. We will continue our discussion next week. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.